Donald and Douglas were rushed off the wheels. Sir Topham Hatt came to see them. "I know you don't mind hard work," he said, "but you can't be everywhere at once. You need some help on the branch lines." The Scottish twins were grateful. "I have a plan," Sir Topham Hatt told them. He went to see a friend who lived in Gloucestershire and explained the problem. The friend took him to meet Wilbert, a smart blue saddle tank engine with 6 wheels. "Your owner says you can come and help me for a while," Sir Topham Hatt told Wilbert. "Would you like that?" Wilbert was delighted. "Yes, please, sir," he said eagerly. His line in the Forest of Dean was short, and he was delighted for the chance to exercise his wheels. "If you're as good as I think you will be," Sir Topham Hatt went on, "I know where I can get another engine like you, and then you'll be able to go back home." Percy was excited when he heard the news. "Another saddle tank, sir?" he said. "Is he like me, sir?" Sir Topham Hatt laughed. "He's bigger and stronger than you, Percy," he said. "Besides, you can manage your freight cars. I want him to help Duck, so I'm afraid you may not even meet him." During the week before Wilbert came, it was cold and wet. The engines thought it would never stop raining. None of them wanted to go out, but passengers and freight cars were waiting. "Just the sort of weather when you need porridge for breakfast," laughed Percy's driver. "What's porridge?" asked Percy. "It's well, difficult to describe," admitted the fireman. "You boil oatmeal in water, which makes a sort of sticky soup," finished the driver. "Then you add milk and sugar. Delicious." At the station by the river, sacks were being stacked on the platform. The men who had filled them had worked fast, and they had not tied the sacks properly. As the porter lifted the last sack, the center arm dropped with a clang. "Better hurry, here's Percy," the porter said, and he swung the heavy sack onto the pile, knocking the top one over. Several sacks tumbled onto the railing line and split open. The oatmeal inside the sacks burst out, covering everything. The pouring rain quickly turned it into a sort of sticky soup. At that moment, Percy appeared. Percy wasn't going fast, but he couldn't prevent himself from plowing into the porridge, which now covered the rails. "Oh!" he exclaimed, and stopped. Porridge dripped from Percy's wheels, rubs, and frames. He felt awful, wet, sticky, and cold. His driver and fireman got down to inspect the mess. "Oh dear," remarked the driver. "Well, Percy, you found out about porridge the hard way, haven't you? The thing is, you're supposed to eat it, not paddle in it." Percy didn't think it was funny. Sir Topham Hatt wasn't amused either. He telephoned to the junction, where they were just in time to stop Wilbert on his way to Duck's branch line. He came along Thomas's line instead, and soon reached the shed at the top station. Percy cheered up at once. "I wanted to meet you," he said, "but I didn't think it would be this way. Porridge is all right for breakfast, my driver says, but it makes a mess of an engine who isn't expecting it." "You're lucky to have a long line," Wilbert told Thomas and Toby. "Mine is only 1.5 miles long with a station at Northshire and another at Wheatley. The scenery is super though, and my driver says it's better up the valley. Our volunteers are going to open that bit too. They work hard, but it takes a long time." One of Wilbert's first jobs was at a lead mine. Don't pass the danger notice, Thomas warned. I fell down a mine once. Wilbert smiled. I've worked in a colliery, he said, so I know about danger notices. But, he added, there was an engine once who thought he knew better. What happened? Asked Toby and Thomas. Wilbert paused. This engine didn't have a name, he began. Just a number, 16, and he worked in the steelworks. One of the jobs that 16 and his friends had to do was to take the waste from the works in special cars to a place they called the tip. Well, went on Wilbert, 16 got tired of always stopping in the same place. He tried to go further, but his driver always prevented him. The other engines tried to stop him too. If the notice says danger, you shouldn't pass it, they said. 16 paid no attention. Don't be stupid, his driver said. We mustn't pass the notice, or goodness knows where we shall end up. But 16 wanted to know. Pah, he scoffed. I can take care of myself. One wet day, 16's chance came. The rails were slippery, and when his driver tried to stop, he couldn't. You see, 16 had asked the freight cars which were in front of him to carry on past the warning sign. They did just that, and their mummido pulled 16 with them. You silly engine, scolded his driver. Wasn't my fault, muttered 16 sulky. It was those cars. You've always wanted to pass that board, said his driver crossly. I believe you asked them to drag us on purpose. A foreman ran towards them. What are you doing there, driver? He shouted. It's not safe. The freight cars dragged us, explained the driver. Well, come to the office with me. And you, fireman, get your engine back on firm ground before it's too late, ordered the foreman. But it was already too late. As the foreman turned away, the earth beneath 16's wheels sank, and the rails sagged. A small rush of stones clattered away to the bottom of the bank. 16's fireman knew that if he tried to move the engines now, he would only make things worse. Oh! Groaned 16. Beneath his weight, the rails sagged even more. Suddenly they fell away completely as the fireman left for safety. 16 overbounced. The coupling between him and the cars broke, and he rolled cab over wheels down the bank. He reached the bottom of a crash and lay on his side, looking surprised and leaking steam in all directions. Help! He gasped weakly. Thomas and Toby were silent. What happened to 16 after that? Ventured Toby. Oh, he was rescued, Wilbert said. But he wasn't repaired, and he was sent to the back of the shed in disgrace. Is he still there? Asked Thomas. He got better than he deserves, smiled Wilbert. Some preservation people came and bought him, and now he lives in the Midlands. But I think he's lucky to have been given a second chance. Thomas and Toby could only agree. There is a dairy beside Thomas's branch line at a station where the lines divided to go either to the harbor or to the junction. Every afternoon, special tanker wagons are pushed into the dairy siding. They are filled with milk, and Percy takes them to the junction on his first train every morning. Thomas explained this to Wilbert. There is a hosepipe thing which puts the milk into the tankers, he said. They'll be ready by the time you get there for the first train. Sounds easy enough, said Wilbert. Thomas told him a great many other details too. Wilbert listened carefully, trying hard to remember them all. Next day, he enjoyed himself. He was a much more powerful engine than Percy, so he found that he could cope easily with Percy's trains. The freight cars behaved well too, which was a help. "He is strong, he is," they muttered to each other. "Don't upset him. You never know what he might do to get his own back." One day, Wilbert took loaded stone cars to the harbor. On his way back with empty ones, he stopped at the station by the dairy and pushed the empty cars into a siding. He left them and set out towards the junction, pulling just a few vans. "Right," he thought happily. "I leave these vans at the junction and bring the empty tankers back. Then, when those are put in the dairy siding, I take the stone cars onto the top station." They met James at the junction. James knew who Wilbert was, of course, and asked how he was getting on. Wilbert chatted excitedly about the jobs he'd been given to do that day. "Sounds as if you're enjoying yourself," James said, "but it's best to take things slowly at first." And he puffed away. Wilbert continued his journey and reached the dairy station easily. But his fireman was worried about water. "We should have filled up at the junction," he said, "but you were busy chatting to James." "Never mind, we'll get water here." The tankers were at the end of the train, so all Wilbert had to do was to push them into the dairy siding. Then he drew forward and stopped beside the hosepipe. "Just in time," said the fireman, and he put the hose into Wilbert's tank. As he turned the tap, the driver spoke to him. The fireman went to reply, but when he returned, he found that Wilbert had stopped at the wrong hosepipe. His tank was full, but not with water, with milk. "You'll be foaming at the funnel if any of this gets in the boiler," gasped the driver. Quickly, they put out Wilbert's fire, and the fireman telephoned for help. Thomas came as soon as he could and pulled Wilbert back to the top station. Wilbert's tank was empty and was given a thorough clean. Next morning, he was quite all right again. "You and Percy make a fine pair," laughed Thomas. "He had the porridge, and you had the milk." As soon as Percy came home, Sir Topham came to see Wilbert. "You've done well so far," Sir Topham told him, "apart from drinking all that milk." Wilbert looked abashed. "I'm sorry, sir," he said. It's all right, Wilbert," smiled Sir Topham. "A mistake any engine could make. But now Percy is back, you can go to help on Duck's branch line." Wilbert puffed away. Percy and the other engines were sorry to see him go. Duck and Oliver made Wilbert very welcome. Duck let him travel in front of his next train so that he could see what the line was like. Wilbert enjoyed this, but found running beside the sea very different from his shelter valley in Gloucestershire. Next day, he began regular work. During the afternoon, he took some ballast wagons to the loading dock beside the Archdale Railway. Rex, Bert, Mike, and Jock were delighted to show off their station to a new engine. Like the other freight cars, those on Duck's line decided that they had better behave too. Donald and Douglas had kept them all in order, but Wilbert just made sure they didn't forget what the twins had taught them. One day, Wilbert was at the ballast loader. As he tried to pull some 4 cars away, there was a loud crack, and he shot suddenly backwards. The fireman got down to look. "The coupling gear on the wagon has pulled away," he said. "Now what?" Beside them, watching with interest, was Bert. "I pulled the train which was glued together once when one of my couplings broke," he said. "We need more than glue here," said Wilbert's driver. Then he noticed a coil of a signal wire lying beside the line. "Could we do anything with that?" he asked. "You never moved the train with wire," objected the fireman. "But what about just one freight car?" suggested Wilbert. "I bet I could pull one car with wire." "Brilliant," said the station master, who come to see what was wrong. "I'll go and tell the Cinnamon what you're doing. Let me know when you're ready." The fireman wound the wire around the freight car's buffer beam, leaving long loops. These he twisted into the rope, making a small loop at the end, which he fastened to Wilbert's coupling hook. A shunter uncoupled the front car from the rest, and at last everything was ready. "Right, Wilbert," said his driver. "Gently now." He opened the regulator very carefully. "Easy," Wilbert slowly backwards. The wire tightening, stretched and held. Slowly, the car followed Wilbert out of the siding, and he could pull then push it into another out of the way. Then he went back to his ballast train. This time there was no trouble, and he reached the big station late but safely. By the end of his day, Sir Topham knew that an engine like Wilbert was exactly what he needed. "I am delighted, Wilbert," said Sir Topham. "Please take our best wishes to your friends in the Forest of Dean. We hope your line there will be as successful as your work here." Thomas, Percy, Toby, and Daisy came to see Wilbert off, and whistled and honked horn cheerfully as he passed. "Beep, beep," called Wilbert. "I've had a wonderful time, but I'm looking forward to getting home. Goodbye and thank you." With a whistle, he rounded the curves and disappeared into the tunnel.